What's up, everybody? T3 here from Future Nature, and I know a while ago I started a video on making cordage, aka making rope. In the modern world, we don't really need rope unless you're a climber, a sailor, something like that. Most people's only interaction with rope, if they have any, is maybe bundling some cardboard together to take to recycling. However, when you are living in the wilderness, you need rope for lots of things. Everything from fish nets to baskets to clothing to bow drill strings to bowstrings to you name it. So there are many different sources of cordage that we can get. Or should I say, we've got a few main types of things, other beings we can gather cordage fibers from. We've got tree inner bark, and keep in mind that not all, just like you can't make a beautiful arrowhead out of any rock you find, you can't make cordage out of any tree's inner bark. So all, the cypresses, the cedars, the cottonwoods, poplars, things like that, they've got great fibers. So no tree bark, then you move on to leaves. So, you've got iris leaves, you got cattail leaves, any of the typha family, things like that. But the one I wanted to talk about today, and the reason being so, is that even though this has well spread out of its normal home range, as they call it, it can be found. I don't think I've ever been anywhere where I haven't seen a yucca plant. So Yucca filamentosa. It is you've all seen it. It grows with these kind of straight up like this, much rounder and better than this, obviously. And this time of year it puts up a flower stalk. Eventually those flowers die off and that stalk dies, and that is great for hand drill, or if it's a thick one, bow drill. However, one of the reasons why our ancestors were so good at living close to the earth and living off the land was because they knew that no one being, the parts of it had only one use. So take this plant, for instance. So we've already talked, we've got a fire making device. A lot of the species, and I'm not sure the percentage wise, the flowers are edible. You got that hand drill stalk for fire making. You've got rope from the leaves, and the root is very high in saponins, so you can actually make soap from the roots. And there were certain indigenous cultures that used, they would basically pound yucca root upstream, and it creates a mild fish toxin that prevents oxygen from entering the fish's lung. So it'd be like if all of a sudden you were breathing and you were only taking in a quarter of the amount of air you needed to. So you could still move, but you're most likely just going to fall over. So it stuns the fish, and then they just would collect them. And I think that's pretty awesome. And it makes really good hair wash, even just taking crushed up yucca root. But as far as cordage goes, there's a couple different ways we can gather and process this. So the first thing is, my apprentice and I were just randomly down at a local recreation area, and there was a few yucca plants growing. So I harvested some green leaves. So I'm going to do the quickie method here, and then later on we'll talk about a little bit better, but a method that requires a little bit more patience. So the fibers are what make this leaf very rigid. And as a cordage maker, my job is to remove all of the excess plant material except for those fibers. Now notice how when I'm tapping this, and I'm tapping pretty light because normally I like a debarked log to do this on, and I'm doing it on a rock, but notice how in just that little tiny bit of pounding, I can already separate that out into, and I can see the white fibers in there. So I'm just going to go a little bit further, and you can kind of help it along a little bit. And I'm literally just using the recoil from the weight of the mallet to, you know, that's all the force I'm putting into this, because my goal is to process this and get rid of all of the extra plant material. It is not to mash the cordage fibers and weaken them themselves. So now that I've done, basically pounded the whole thing, you'll notice how easily I can pull this apart. Now, once I pull this apart, I've got a couple options to me. Option number one, I can set this out in the sun and let it dry for a couple hours and then hit it with the cordage mallet again until eventually you get to a point where you just have this very strong, these strong fibers. Another technique, and kind of my preferred technique, is known as retting, R-E-T-T-I-N-G. So retting is essentially the controlled rotting of something. So what I would normally do is I would take a bunch more leaves than this, especially this time of year, and I would fill up a 5-gallon bucket of water, and I would throw the leaves in there, and if they floated, I'd weight them down, and I would stick that bucket in the sunniest part of the yard, and I would let it sit for a few days, and every once in a while I'd go over and give it a smell. And once it smells like a combination of rotting broccoli and dirty gym socks, you know you're good to go. And I've actually gotten it to where, so what that's doing is, being that the cordage fiber is the strongest part of the plant, and the chlorophyll and all the other plant matter isn't, you can actually take that retted yucca leaf and you purposely leave one thumbnail long, and you can go like this and just pull, and all of the extra plant matter sloughs off, and you're left with just cordage fibers. But it does take it takes a few days. If it's winter time or you're using cold running water, that could take a long time. That's why I like a pond or a bucket, because that water is going to get hot. The heat is going to cause further breakdown. So this one I'm working on, it's coming along pretty nice. Now, one other technique I wanted to show you is the scrape technique. Now I'm just going to move this log over. So another thing you can do, these yucca leaves are kind of like round. A lot of them are flat. Most of them, they kind of start out like almost a half circle, and then they flatten out as they lengthen. But these guys are new growth. So another thing I can do, and I can do this, in combination with the retting, is I can take the blade or the back of, if I had my LT right on me, which has that not super sharp back edge to it, and I can just kind of gently scrape off that plant matter. And this isn't the best, most ideal setup for this. Obviously I would want a longer log, Notice how I'm obeying all the rules of knife safety. So I'm just going to do this section for time's sake, but just scraping that one side, you can see the color difference. Those fibers eventually, once they're fully dry, will be almost white in color. And this stuff makes some of the strongest cordage material there is. So the next time we will revisit Yucca filamentosa is when I do the bucket soak technique. So until next time, peace and love. That's what. So any